Alright, Josh here, and I'm going to review the second of three Crusher Joe features, this one being the first of the two OVAs that precede the movie, and I realize I'm starting in the middle, but seeing as these are episodic adventures, it won't really matter, and I will get around to reviewing the other ones. I love all the Crusher Joe OVAs, so if you really just want to stop watching the review right now, I suppose you could, because that's my opinion. Regardless, this is Crusher Joe the Ice Prison. And while this is probably the slowest of the Crusher Joe features, it's still really entertaining. There's a lot of good parts to it. I just watched it again just a few minutes ago, and I found myself actually liking it more the second time around. Alright, to start off with the story, the Crusher team, and I suppose I should clarify that before I go any further, is basically what amounts to the go-to team. There is an entire planet of Crushers, as they're called, that will do any job for you as long as you pay them the money. And it's a huge organization. Everyone uses them because they're just that good. Crusher Joe himself is in the A class, of course, him being the main character. Now, the plot of Ice Prison involves him and his team, which involves Ricky, Alphin, Talos, basically of the team, the kid, the woman, and the strong man, respectively, I will say stereotypes, but at the same time, they are the progenitors to a lot of the series you will probably think they're stereotypes off of. The closest example will be Cowboy Bebop. Every character can be easily supplanted in, Joe for Spike, Alphin for Faye, and so on and so on. They are different, I will say. They are not quite as eminently likable, but to the point of the series, they don't necessarily need to be. Anyway, I'll get onto that later. The story is basically Crusher and his team are assigned during a vacation to go help out a planet called Curious. And Curious has an ice planetoid hovering about in its orbit, which they use as a prison for political dissidents. And the government there happens to be kind of a pseudo dictatorship led by a man called Gelston, his head supervisor Hume. And the Crushers are tasked, after the ice prison was shot by a laser beam from Curious's space station, to help avoid the catastrophe of this ice planetoid crashing back into the planet and causing catastrophic damage, as well as to rescue the prisoners inside. Now, this being a very obvious feature, very obvious show, now, you will easily see the characters, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and I think that's what's good about it, to be honest. The characters are very simple, likable in that way. You can automatically relate to them. You don't need to focus a whole lot of your attention on that. And for a lot of this, many will call this mindless fun. And yes, it is to an extent, though Ice Prison is much slower and takes a while to get to the action. It does have a lot more planning bits in it. But I think at the same time, the Crusher Joe features, and particularly the Ice Prison, the movie more so, but the Ice Prison particularly has a very good plot to it. The characters in it are not extremely well developed. None of the characters are. This is very much a series of featurettes, as the episodes of Bebop, for example. Hate to go back to it, continue to compare it, but it's true. It relates to that in the way that they're all episodic. They all kind of work the characters in somewhat, but none of them are really specifically about them. Now, I realize Bebop had character-specific episodes, but go with me here. The plot to this is basically the supposed autocratic government of Curious, led by Gelston, is trying to put on a good show for what amounts to the UN and the galaxy by hiring Crushers to help them save the prisoners inside, political dissidents, and have them sacrifice themselves in the process. Now, that could be considered a spoiler, but considering this is less than an hour long, and really, this is really easy to see. If you don't see us coming right off the bat, you're an idiot. I mean, no offense. It's like watching a Bond movie and thinking to himself, is he gonna beat the bad guy this time? Of course he's gonna beat the bad guy. He's Bond. It just goes that way. And I think that's the simplicity that you can really appreciate. You don't see nowadays anymore. Everything has to be either absurdly overplotted, read Transformers, or it has to be just too complicated for its own good. I mean, a lot of things, they would be better with just simplicity. I think we overthink things nowadays. Anyway, getting back to it, I think the simplicity really goes for it, because, like I said, the plot is quite interesting. It's actually a good world builder. I realize Crusher Joe is a generic space opera setting, but it populates it with some rather interesting characters, and when we get to the movie review, there's certainly some interesting parts of that one. But the story for this, it's good. You'll be entertained, actually, and that's a good thing, because there's less action than there is in the other two features. And the characters, not too great, but still likable nonetheless. Moving on to the animation, this was made in 1989, both the OVAs were, and while they do come after the movie does look better because it has a higher budget. This is not a terrible looking show, don't get me wrong. In fact, the big space fight scene in the end looks quite nice, to be honest. The rest of it is serviceable, good and detailed, but it's nothing that's going to blow you away. It's older animation. If you don't like older animation, you're probably not going to like this at all. And the characters have a certain fluidity to them. They don't have necessarily set parts. They don't seem to have the same joint structure as many other characters. They move it's a very flow-like appearance. It's kind of hard to describe without having you actually seen older anime. If you've ever seen Lupin the Third, it's very much like that. Anyway, the animation is quite good. You won't be disappointed by it. It's not terrible to look at by any means. It is well produced. As far as the sound goes, there is some really good tracks in here. It's not quite as epic as the movie, which had a full orchestra behind it, but this has some really good music. It's quite sweeping and heroic, and really fits the tone of this. It's something you really think you need good heroic music in the background, because the good guys are always going to beat the bad guys. They got to swoop in at the last moment against all odds and beat them, and it really does serve you that. Like I said, it's not quite as epic sounding as the movie soundtrack, but without an orchestra, that's hard to expect. It does not fall into many 80s cliches of using synthesizers. It does have a couple of sound effects generally that's sort of like that because of the budget lessened, but overall the music and the animation are quite good. You won't feel gypped in that matter. Digressing a little back to the detractors of the ice prison, making it the worst of the three. Not bad, but definitely the lesser. This is a much slower paced feature than the other two, like I said before, and that does unfortunately work to its detriment. Though the plot is interesting, the characters can be quite annoying at times. Dongo, their robot assistant, much like Buck Rogers' real robot friend there, is not exactly the most entertaining character, and his banter really doesn't fit all that well, to be honest. And Ricky, while the same, is not quite as annoying. He does have that same air of annoyance. But aside from that, I will say, it's not overly annoying. You won't throttle them when you may throttle Dongo, but Dongo is just much like the Jar Jar Binks of anime. He's just not that great to begin with. The less of him, the better. Less is more. And also, like I said before, since there is less action, the show is not quite as exciting as the other two features. Like, it does have a decent plot, like I've said many times before, hate to reiterate, but it is true. I want to state that. I want to make sure it's out there. But the action, it's good when it happens, but there's only about 3 or 4 action scenes in this that really count, and it is a disappointment, especially after you've watched the movie, which if you've bought the DVD set it contains all 3 features. You've probably watched the movie first, followed by the OVAs, because there's a sequel, so you likely have. One note on that, if you do want to pick up Crusher Joe on DVD, good luck. You will need to buy it used or find an extremely rare copy like I did at a convention, because this thing went out of print, and it went out of print fast. Anime Ego just drops their titles dead. If you want them, you gotta buy them. Thankfully, they don't produce a whole lot. Regardless, in conclusion, Crusher Joe the Ice Prison is a serviceable OVA for the series. If you like action, if you like sci-fi or space opera in particular, like Star Trek, you will generally like this. It's got some great music, some really good, decent animation, I will say. And the plot's pretty good. The characters are quite likable archetypes. And you can't go wrong with this. It's only an hour of your life. Try it out.